I left without applause. I didn't get a farewell cake or warm words. I just packed my bags, turned off my monitor, and walked out of the building, leaving behind year-long projects, other people's ideas on my slides, and the smiles that had been directed through me the whole time. You too know what it's like to be too loud when you don't want to be heard. Too precise when you'd rather not say anything. Too much when you just want to be enough. And now I'll tell you why too much has always been okay. They just haven't learned to listen to those who speak the truth to your face and not behind your back. If you've ever felt like your voice is too loud for the room, click, like, subscribe, and get comfortable. This isn't just a story. It's a mirror of someone else's pain that can touch your own experience. A story about being heard and why sometimes silence becomes the only way out. It will stay with you for a long time. I still remember the way Karen looked at me when I raised my hand. Not shocked, exactly, more like amused. As if she were watching a toddler try to argue with the GPS. It was the quarterly marketing sync at Hartman and Will's, and the room smelled like catered breakfast and 1,000 tiny judgments. I'd been working there just shy of 9 months. Not new, not old. Enough time to have seen how things worked. Or didn't. That morning, Jake, VP of Brand, was presenting some campaign metrics that just didn't add up. He skipped over a slide with a growth percentage that contradicted the deck from last week, and everyone nodded along like it was gospel. Everyone except me. Sorry, could you go back to that last slide? I said. Calm, even tone. Not confrontational. Just a question. Jake flicked back, blinking. Something wrong. It just doesn't match what we reviewed in last Thursday's dataset. The engagement rate here is down, but you've labeled it as up. Are we using a different baseline? The room went quiet in that uncomfortable way where everyone pretends to check their notes so they won't be accused of picking a side. Jake didn't answer right away. Instead, it was Karen, director of strategy, who laughed. Not loud, but just loud enough. You're very detailed, Maya, she said. That's good. But maybe save the grilling for one-on-ones, huh? We've got a lot to get through. She smiled at me like she was handing me a compliment. Like a biscuit tossed to a well-meaning dog. I smiled back, the kind you give when your jaw tightens and your chest gets hot. I felt the whole room shift, just slightly away from me. That moment, that smirk, said everything. You're not allowed to question this loudly. Not with your name, not with your face, not with your tone. Too sharp. Too firm. Too much. After the meeting, as people filtered out, Ben from comms leaned over and whispered, "You kind of went in back there." I wanted to ask him what kind of went in meant. I wanted to ask why accuracy was aggressive when it came from me. But I didn't. I just nodded and went back to my desk. The thing is, I wasn't even trying to make a scene. I just wanted the numbers to make sense. But that didn't matter. I'd already been filed away in their minds. And not as smart. Not as thorough. Just as opinionated. And not the good kind. After that meeting, I noticed the way people started adjusting around me. Not dramatically, nobody shouted or slammed doors, but it was in the shifts, the glances, the silences that used to be filled with small talk. I'd walk into a room and conversations would pause half a beat longer than normal. In Slack, I'd ask a question and get polite, delayed responses with too many emojis or not enough words. It was like everyone was waiting to see if I was going to make trouble again. As if clarity had a cost and I just started a tab. At lunch, Ben slid into the seat across from me. He didn't bring up the meeting directly, but his tone had that soft suggestion, like he was doing me a favor. Sometimes it's better to let leadership catch their own errors. Makes you look like a team player. I wanted to ask him if he'd ever tried waiting around for people to catch their own errors when those people already assumed they were right just because of who they were. But I kept chewing. Turkey sandwich, no mustard. Bland enough to match the moment. The thing that got under my skin wasn't just the meeting. It was how familiar it all felt. I'd seen it before in college seminars where my tone was too pointed while Brad's was insightful. In internships where I was told to pick my battles when all I'd done was raise a basic inconsistency. And now in this office where my observations were strong takes and Jake's were strategic insights. Same room, same points. Different reactions. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't even particularly passionate. Just precise. And that apparently was too much for someone like me. Karen came by my desk a couple days later. She smiled that same tight-lipped smile and said, "Don't get me wrong, Maya. I like that you've got a mind of your own. Just learn to read the room, okay?" And I wanted to ask, which part of the room? The part that silently agreed with me but said nothing? The part that laughed along with the mistake because it was easier? Or the part that saw my skin and my name and quietly decided I was out of line before I even spoke? Instead, I said, got it. But I didn't. Not really. Because I wasn't wrong. I just wasn't allowed to be right the way I was. My first annual review came up in December, tucked between holiday parties and a surprise visit from the regional VP. It was my manager, Liz, who called me into a glass-walled conference room. She smiled, like they all did, like she was gearing up to deliver constructive feedback with a side of goodwill. We started with the small talk. How's everything going, and you've had a strong year? I nodded, smiled. Waited. I knew the dance. I also knew when the turn was coming. She shifted in her chair. There's just one area I think we could work on. There it was. Some folks have mentioned, she said gently, that you can come off a little intense in meetings. I tilted my head slightly. Intense how? She winced like she hadn't expected me to ask. Just, very passionate. Very opinionated. Opinionated? There it was again. Like clockwork. I asked, is that based on specific feedback, or just a general sense? Liz blinked. She fumbled with her notes. I'm just passing along what I've heard. It's nothing to be too concerned about, really. Just something to keep in mind, tone, delivery, that sort of thing. Tone. Delivery. Not content. I'd written 3 strategy decks that quarter, each one praised in emails, each one implemented. I brought in a new analytics framework that shaved 2 weeks off our reporting timeline. I trained 2 new hires who both thanked me for being the only one who explained things without making them feel stupid. But all that got tucked beneath the word opinionated. I looked out at the office through the glass wall, people laughing, walking, grabbing coffee. I wondered if they knew how that word curved differently depending on who it was aimed at. Jake had a sharp tongue in meetings. He once told a junior designer that her slide looked like a kindergartner made it. People laughed. Called it Jake being Jake. Not one person labeled him intense. But me? My voice was calm, my points backed by data, and still I was the one working on delivery. I nodded at Liz, just enough to move the conversation forward. She smiled again, relieved. Overall, great job. Really? Just keep this in mind as you grow. That night I went home and looked up my old resume. I wasn't thinking about quitting. Not yet. But I needed to remember who I was outside of that word. Outside of how they saw me. Casual Fridays weren't really casual. Not for me. While other people wore hoodies and joked about bottomless brunch, I still came in with my shirt pressed. Jeans dark and fitted. A blazer most weeks. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, just because I knew what casual looked like when I did it. And how quickly it could slide into unprofessional if someone decided it should. That Friday, I was at the coffee station when I overheard Kyle and Rachel talking about the new intern. She's super sharp, Rachel said. But she's got some strong opinions for someone just starting out. I didn't say anything. Just stirred my coffee and sipped. Because I knew that tone. I knew what strong opinions meant in that context. I'd been her. Still was. Only difference was I no longer needed to be new to be considered presumptuous. Back at my desk, I got an email from HR about a voluntary focus group on inclusion. They were collecting stories, ideas, safe space for honest feedback. I stared at it for a full minute before deleting it. Not because I didn't have stories, but because I already knew what would happen to them. They'd get folded into a PowerPoint. Words like diverse voices and cultural awareness would be dropped in. Maybe they'd add a line to the next DI report. But nothing would change in the rooms that mattered. The rooms where people like me were still being told gently, smilingly, that our voices needed softening. Around lunchtime, I passed the intern Jasmine, I think, in the hallway. She looked young, hopeful, the way I must have looked once. I thought about stopping. About saying, hey, you're not imagining it. You're not too much. You're just enough, they just haven't figured out how to hold that yet. But I didn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready to be that person. Not when I was still figuring out how to carry the weight of it myself. Back at my desk, I adjusted the volume on my headset. Took a deep breath. Rewrote a sentence in an email 3 times before sending it. Just opinionated enough to be heard. But not so much they'd say it again. We were building a new campaign for a major client. A lifestyle brand trying to rebrand as inclusive without actually doing the work. The kind of project where buzzwords get thrown around like confetti: authenticity, diversity, belonging. It was supposed to be collaborative. Ideas welcome. All voices matter. Except they didn't. Not really. In the kickoff meeting, I suggested a narrative arc that would focus less on surface-level representation and more on actual lived experience. Something grounded. Real. I cited a case study. Brought up the numbers. Suggested reaching out to actual communities, not just influencers. People nodded, smiled. And then 5 minutes later, Josh pitched the exact same idea with less detail and more bravado, and suddenly it was compelling. Karen even said, "Yes, now that's the direction we're looking for." I sat there with my pen frozen halfway down the page. No one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. Later that afternoon, I pinged Karen directly, just to clarify. "Hey, just checking if there was something in my pitch earlier that didn't quite land. Want to make sure I'm tracking." She replied within 2 minutes, "Not at all. Your points were great. Just think Josh's delivery really brought it to life." Smiling face with smiling eyes. I stared at that smiley face like it was a dare. As if tone mattered more than substance. As if his swagger made the message better. As if my words needed to be repackaged in a louder voice to count. I thought about saying something. I even drafted a message. Then deleted it. Because I knew what would happen. I'd be defensive. I'd be difficult. I'd be the one who can't take feedback. So I let it go. Outwardly. But inside, a quiet note of fatigue added itself to the ongoing hum. The kind you carry in your chest, not loud enough to cry over, but deep enough to chip at something. They don't even know they're doing it. That's the worst part. It's not personal, it's systemic. It happens without malice, which makes it harder to call out. Harder to fight. Like fog. I stayed late that night. Finished the draft deck. Fixed the metrics. Formatted Josh's slides. Because if it was going to be my idea, I wanted to make sure it didn't fall apart when someone else wore it. It came at 8:13 p.m., right as I was finishing dinner, an email from Jake, CC'd to half the team, praising the refined direction of the campaign deck Josh had presented that afternoon. "This is the clarity we needed," he wrote. "Great leadership, Josh." I stared at the screen for a long time. My name wasn't mentioned. Not once. Not even in the "also thanks to" section at the bottom where they usually toss in a nod to whoever pulled the numbers or wrote the copy. I wasn't invisible, I was erased. I'd worked on that deck until my eyes burned. The notes, the design, the storyline, that was me. Every chart, every word choice, every image source to match the narrative. I even rewrote the intro Josh had bungled, cleaning up his vague platitudes into something that actually sounded like strategy. But here it was. An inbox reminder of how disposable I was. I didn't reply. I didn't say actually I stayed late every night this week polishing that thing. I didn't forward the Google Doc with the revision history showing every track change in my name. I didn't ask for credit. Because I already knew what they'd say. It's a team effort. You're all valued. Let's not get too precious about ownership. And maybe I could have pushed back. Demanded acknowledgement. But I also knew what came next when people like me did that. The sideways glances. The whispered hard to work with. The slow withdrawal of opportunities, not dramatic enough to prove but steady enough to feel. So I sat with it. Ate the rest of my dinner in silence. Closed my laptop with a calm that didn't reach my ribs. This is how it works. Not through grand betrayals. Through the 1,000 little cuts of omission. Through the careful choreography of who gets to be seen as a leader and who stays support. And in that moment, all I could think was I did everything right. And it still wasn't enough. It was Monday morning and I already knew the meeting was going to be performative. My calendar buzzed with a 9:30 one-on-one with Karen, slid in over the weekend with no agenda, just the vague title, check-in. We sat in a corner meeting room, sun cutting through the blinds like the room was trying too hard to be pleasant. She started with compliments. She always did. "You've been really productive lately," she said, sipping her oat milk latte. "The deck last week? Fantastic execution." Execution. Not ideation. Not strategy. Just the labor. "Thanks," I said. Neutral. Flat. She crossed her legs, leaned in slightly. "I wanted to chat because I've noticed a bit of friction. Not overt, just energy. Some folks feel you're a bit resistant to feedback." I raised my eyebrows. "Feedback on what?" She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Oh, not anything specific. Just the vibe. You're very self-assured, which is great, but it can read as rigid sometimes." I sat with that. "So, people feel uncomfortable because I'm confident?" She chuckled lightly in that tight, professional way. "It's all about balance. Reading the room. Knowing when to push and when to let things breathe." I nodded slowly. "And who decides when it's time to push?" Karen looked momentarily off balance, then recovered. "It's not a hierarchy thing. It's about tone, Maya. You're very sharp. Just be mindful. There it was again. The compliment disguised as warning. Sharp. Direct. These weren't bad things unless I owned them. Unless they came out of my mouth. Unless they didn't come with an apology baked in. We wrapped with the usual pleasantries. She said she believed in me. I said I appreciated the feedback. But I left that room with something lodged in my throat, a quiet burn that came not from what was said, but from everything that went unsaid. Because what she meant wasn't mind your tone. What she meant was know your place. And I did. I always had. That's why it stung. The office threw one of its semi-regular culture nights that Thursday. Drinks, soft jazz, a few past hors d'oeuvres with names longer than the plates they came on. The kind of event where interns rubbed shoulders with execs and everyone pretended it wasn't about politics. I didn't want to go. But I knew I had to. I stood near the back, sipping seltzer and making the same small talk in slightly different iterations. Busy week, huh? Big client push coming up. Can you believe how warm it is for October? Then I saw Josh laughing too loud near the bar, holding court with a group that included Jake and one of the partners. I wasn't jealous, I was exhausted. Exhausted by the ease with which they moved, how their mistakes were forgiven with a chuckle and a drink. Later, someone introduced me to a director from another division. A white man in his mid-40s named Paul who gave me the up-and-down glance that wasn't overtly creepy but still made my skin crawl. "And what do you do, Maya?" he asked, like he hadn't already read my name tag. "I'm a strategist in brand development, focused on data-backed storytelling and audience insights." He gave a little nod, then smiled. "Impressive. You're very well spoken." There it was. That phrase. The one that's meant to sound like praise but always lands like a leash. It always comes out slow, like they're tasting the surprise in their own mouths. Well spoken for someone like me. As if fluency in my own language were some kind of magic trick. A dog walking on its hind legs. I smiled. "Thanks. So are you." He didn't get it. He laughed, took a sip of his whiskey, and wandered off to flatter someone else. I stood by the window for the rest of the night, watching the city pulse below. The glass reflected my face back at me, neutral, unreadable, practiced. I'd done everything I was supposed to. Said the right things. Asked the right questions. Played the game. And still, I was a curiosity. A footnote. An asterisk. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just exist in a space like this without having to translate myself. To not be well-spoken. To just be. The following Monday, we had another team brainstorm. Same boardroom. Same stale muffins. Karen at the whiteboard, Jake at the head of the table, arms crossed like he was guarding some sacred knowledge. The brief was simple, new positioning for a spring campaign. A chance to stretch, be bold. I waited. Let others go first. Their ideas skated around the edges. Safe. On brand. Predictable. Then I spoke. What if we flip the narrative? Focus not on the product itself, but on the disconnect people feel in modern life and how the brand bridges that gap. It's emotional. Tangible. Real. The room went quiet, then Jake frowned like he was squinting through fog. I don't know, he said slowly, turning to Karen. Feels a little heavy. Maybe we keep it light, yeah? Uplifting. Karen nodded. We don't want to complicate the message. Complicate. Heavy. There it was again. Nobody challenged it. Nobody said, wait, maybe Maya's onto something. Even though I saw a few people nod when I was speaking, no one stepped in. Not one. I didn't push. I just leaned back, said nothing else for the rest of the meeting. As the room filled with words again, words less thoughtful, less risky, I watched the idea morph into something hollow. Smiles returned. The safe returned. The familiar reasserted itself. And I realized something that hurt more than the dismissal. They weren't afraid of being wrong. They were afraid of being challenged by someone they weren't ready to respect. Someone whose insight didn't come wrapped in the right packaging. I wasn't one of the guys. I wasn't quirky enough to be forgiven. I wasn't cute when I pushed back. I was a problem they didn't know how to solve without changing the system around them. So instead, they silenced me. With politeness. With protocol. With the slow suffocation of being tolerated but never quite embraced. Every year there was an off-site retreat. Some rented lake house 2 hours out, where senior team members and rising stars got to drink, unwind, and talk shop away from HR policies. It wasn't on the books. No official agenda. But everyone knew it mattered. The people who went came back more relaxed. More looped in. They knew which clients were on the move, which promotions were coming. And every year, someone lower down got the nod. The quiet, unofficial tap on the shoulder, "You should come this time." I wasn't expecting it. But I guess I was hoping. By now I had the metrics. The wins. My campaigns had exceeded projections. I'd taken on 2 extra accounts when a coworker went on leave. I led brainstorms, trained a junior strategist, even got name-checked in a client's thank you email. So when Sarah, newer than me, louder than me, a little messier but well-liked, posted a selfie from the lake house deck with the caption, "Work hard, wine harder, wineglass 2 hearts," my stomach dropped. She'd been tapped. I hadn't. I scrolled through the photos. Karen by the grill. Jake doing a mock toast. Sarah laughing with Josh, barefoot, holding a glass of Pinot like she was born into it. They looked like a team. A tribe. And I saw what I already knew but hadn't wanted to name. I didn't fit. It wasn't about performance. It never had been. It was about comfort. Who made them feel at ease? Who fit the culture without making them look too closely at what that culture excluded? I sat with that feeling, not anger, not sadness, just recognition. The quiet knowing that there are rooms you will never be fully invited into, no matter how well you do. Not because you haven't earned it, but because your presence asks questions the room would rather not answer. And sometimes the loudest exclusion is silence. It wasn't dramatic. No breakdown. No angry email. Just a quiet decision that began forming like condensation on a window, slow, silent, and undeniable. One morning, I opened my laptop and looked at the calendar packed with meetings I didn't speak in anymore. Deadlines for campaigns that had my fingerprints all over them but someone else's name on the slide. Another, lunch and learn on how to speak up effectively, hosted by people who never listened. And I thought, why am I still here? I started small. Updated my resume. Reached out to 2 old mentors. Bookmarked a few job postings. At night, I researched organizations led by women of color, agencies where strategy didn't have to be smuggled in under someone else's voice. I didn't tell anyone at work. Not yet. The mask was still in place. Smiles in the hallway. Slack reactions. Thanks, under feedback that flattened me. But inside something had shifted. Not out of bitterness, though there was some. Not even anger. It was quieter than that. Tired. Sure. Because I knew now that I wasn't the problem. My opinions weren't the problem. My voice wasn't too much. Their ears were too narrow. Their space too rigid. Every time they said I was too opinionated, what they meant was, you remind us that the rules aren't neutral. That confidence sounds different coming from you, and that makes us uncomfortable. It's not just that they didn't see me. It's that they refused to. And the worst part? They probably thought they were being kind. When I handed in my notice, Liz blinked like I'd short-circuited her morning. "Oh," she said, the word stretching out. "Wow. I didn't see this coming." I nodded, polite. "It's time." We went through the formalities. Last day. Handoff notes. Exit interview with HR that I knew would be archived and forgotten before I even closed my laptop. But what stuck with me was what she said just before I left her office. "I hope you find a place that appreciates your strength." Strength. Not talent. Not perspective. Strength. The word felt like a consolation prize. A pat on the head for surviving what shouldn't have needed surviving. My final week passed like a whisper. A few people stopped by my desk. Most didn't. Some offered awkward goodbyes laced with curiosity they didn't dare express. I could see it in their eyes. Why is she really leaving? I didn't give them an answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because I had too many. On my last day, I shut down my computer and walked to the lobby. The receptionist, Daria, smiled at me. She was the only other black woman in the building. She didn't say goodbye. She just said, "You good?" I smiled. "Yeah, I think I am." And for the first time in a long while it felt true. I walked out into the cold air, no fanfare, no send-off cake. Just me and my breath, sharp and clean. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt real, unhidden. 2 months later, I started at a new firm. Smaller team, scrappier projects. My title was still strategist, but here the word didn't come with a leash. My new boss, Lena, asked for my input in the first meeting, and when I gave it, she didn't flinch or smile too hard. She just listened, took notes, asked a follow-up. That first week, I had to unlearn a dozen reflexes. I braced every time I spoke, waiting for the interruption, the deflection, the careful condescension. It didn't come. It was like leaning into a punch and finding open air. One day, I caught myself apologizing before suggesting a change to a client pitch. Lena looked at me and said, "You don't have to soften every edge. You're here because your voice has shape. Shape. Not tone. Not attitude. Not sharpness. Shape." I left that meeting and sat in the bathroom stall for a full 5 minutes, not crying exactly, just breathing in a space that suddenly felt too big. My body didn't know how to relax yet. Not fully. But something in me exhaled that hadn't in years. I still carried the past with me. The comments. The omissions. The careful silence dressed up as feedback. But here it didn't define me. I wasn't too much anymore. I was finally simply enough. It happened at a grocery store of all places. I was in line scrolling through a client brief on my phone when I heard a voice behind me say, "Excuse me, Maya, right?" I turned. It was Sarah. From the old job. Still impeccably dressed. Still carrying the air of someone who knew she belonged. We did the usual pleasantries. "How are things? Where are you now? So great to run into you." Then just as I was about to turn back, she said it. "I always admired how direct you were. I don't think I could have done it." I gave a polite smile. "Done what?" She glanced around like she was about to say something risky. "You know. Spoken up. Held your ground. They didn't always make it easy." And just like that, it was all back. The meetings, the silences, the too opinionated. Except now, standing next to organic avocados and impulse gum racks, I realized she'd known. Maybe not fully, maybe not consciously, but somewhere deep in her. It hadn't been invisible. She just hadn't wanted to be next to it. I didn't say that. I just said, "You get used to it." She nodded, but we both knew that wasn't true. As I walked out into the cold, grocery bags in hand, I kept thinking about her words. Admired. Couldn't have done it. It felt less like flattery and more like a confession. Like she'd watched me push through a wall she pretended didn't exist. Grateful I was the one with bruises. That's the thing about being too opinionated. In a room that wasn't built for you. Even silence has an audience. Sometimes now, in meetings at my new job, I catch myself hesitating before I speak. It's reflex. Like reaching for a light switch in a house I no longer live in. But the room doesn't punish me for confidence here. It doesn't shrink when I challenge something. If I get animated, no one tilts their head or jokes that I'm on one today. My words are just words. Not weighted. Not weaponized. Still, the echo of the old place lingers. It shows up in my email drafts in the passive tone I still fight to delete. It shows up in the way I overthink people, apologize twice before sending feedback. It shows up in the quiet doubt that sometimes whispers, "Don't make them uncomfortable." But I'm learning. Slowly. I keep a post-it on my monitor now. Just says, "Say it how you mean it." And when I do, when I say something clearly without rounding the edges, without asking for permission, I feel that old voice quieting. Not gone but softer. The truth is, it wasn't just about me being too opinionated. It was about a system designed to hear certain voices and tune out the rest. To value polish over presence. Charm over clarity. Familiarity over fairness. But I never wanted to be palatable. I wanted to be true. And now in this new chapter, I've stopped trying to pass through closed doors. I'm building my own rooms. Here's the part they never tell you. Being too much in the wrong place just means you're the right amount in the right one. And when I finally stopped shrinking, the world didn't fall apart. Just got quieter. And then it started to listen.